Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Greg Vogel, and I'm just honored to present our West Valley overview and look forward to discussing the West Valley as a whole. I'm really honored also to have Tina do this again for and with us to discuss the resale market. And Tina is with the Cromford report. I'm sure many of you subscribe to, and if you don't already, you should. Tina, I'm just going to turn it right over to you, and I look
All right.
forward to seeing your presentation. So thanks for being with us, Tina.
Oh, my pleasure. Well, let's go ahead and we'll kick it off. And we're just starting off with a little fun photo of the month here. We were discussing it a little off camera. This is 1985, 24th Street in Camelback. The year Greg got into the land, as he just told me. And it's about 8 years before I moved here. And I was joking around too. Every time I do these older photos, it just makes me feel older and older. We had color photos, people. Anyhow, let's move on. We're going to talk about the West Valley today, but we're going to do a little bit of overall. So you'll see how the West Valley compares to the overall valley. But first, let's talk about that August 22nd speech by Jerome Powell. This was a big deal for us, especially in the residential market, because the latest jobs revisions report was a bit of a shock, and it did send the bond market down a bit, and it also sent mortgage rates down. But the big thing was, what are they going to do in September? Because they had already stated in their July meeting that they were going to keep the Fed funds rate solid right where it is. They were going to continue to reduce their securities holdings. That's maintaining a relatively tight monetary policy. And then the day after, that massive jobs adjustment came in and then blew a lot of those expectations out of the water. And so now they were wondering on this speech, how is the Federal Reserve going to adjust based on this new data at their September 17th meeting? And so he gave us a little bit of a hint there, the shifting balance of risks. So they have their dual mandate. The labor market needs to be at maximum employment, and they want to keep inflation at 2%. And of course, inflation has been rising a bit. Not so much the CPI, but the PCE came in a little bit higher. So elevated, but not too terrible at this stage. But what we believe is that they are going to see employment as more important than inflation at this stage. So while they have a dual mandate, if employment starts to weaken, then that means that they're probably going to lighten up a bit. And so what they stated here is, after that new report, the balance of risks appeared to be shifting. Looks like there is an upside risk to inflation, but there's also a downside risk of unemployment. So looking at that, they may warrant adjusting their policy stance. And that was the exact thing that the market wanted to hear at that time. So as you can see, we already had a pretty big drop off after the jobs report came in, from about 6.75 down to about 6.6, and then bounced around that 6.5, was on its way up. And then on that day, we came back down to 6.54. And so this is now the lowest mortgage rate we've seen, going all the way back to October 4th. And it is not only the lowest, but it stayed low. And that is the key right now to having any kind of recovery. None of this, I'm going to kiss 6.6 and bounce back up to 7.1, or kiss 6.7 and bounce back up to 7.3%. It's been a very tough year, and buyers have had very little windows to actually take advantage of some of these lower rates. And so 6.54 staying there for pretty much all of August for the most part is a good thing. And we have definitely seen it after seeing a restriction in buyer activity and demand for quite some time due to these rates. We are now starting to see a bounce. And this bottom right here that you're seeing, that was 4th of July weekend. So it's typical to see a bit of a bottoming out in 4th of July as people are going out of town and such. But right after the 4th of July was over, we saw this big rebound. And that rebound was a 19% rebound from from July, but 18% higher than last year, and also better than the year before that. That little yellow line at the top is 2022. So not quite as high as 22's bounce from a rate drop, but I will take it, man. So these newly accepted contracts coming in hot are flowing into everything that's under contract waiting to close over the next 30 to 45 days. And that is now up nearly 7%. And I can't stress enough that we don't normally see bounces in the latter half of the year like this. Usually we have our main season, that's where it comes flying in, and then it comes on down and we go flat. But this time around, we're definitely seeing a nice bounce for the Valley. And West Valley is in the same boat, except, the good news about West Valley is that their pricing and a lot of their incentives out there, especially with the new homes, are attracting a lot of those first-time home buyers. And so we're seeing contract activity up 11.2% from this time last year for the West Valley contract activity. So that brings us to the Cromford Market Index. And for those of you not familiar with the Cromford Market Index, at 100, that is perfect balance of supply and demand. We considered anything between 90 and 110 a balanced zone. When you're in balance, you can expect to see your annual appreciation rates go to the rate of inflation. And right now, the rate of inflation for Greater Phoenix is 0.2%. Okay, not impressive. And so if you are in a seller's market, you might get better than the rate of inflation. Like I said, not a very big bar, okay, to get over. But if you are below 90 in a buyer's market, that means that you are probably going to be heading negative in your annual appreciation rate, which is going to be depreciation. The overall market right now is 78.1. But what I want to point out here is that it is actually improving. So the supply index is down 4.8 points over the last 30 days. That is a pretty notable 15% decline in supply so far. The demand index was going down in the last 30 days, flattened out, and actually started to rise, in case you can't see that. Started to rise right around that beginning of August when the interest rates initially dropped. And so it went up mildly, and then it started to go up a lot more noticeably, up 0.8 points over the last 30 days. Not gangbusters, but it's just enough to push this market index up. With supply coming down, demand now going up, this is what it looks like on the Cromford Market Index. So are you going to notice any recovery in price at this stage? Absolutely not. You're still in a buyer's market, which means you're still going to be seeing a declining price line. You will not see a bottoming of price until the market index gets into balance. And at this trajectory that we're at, if I keep my cursor going, we could potentially be in a balanced market by November if it stays at this level. And now if we see demand go up even farther and we still see supply coming down, then it could go up at a faster rate. But at this stage, you're still going to see prices struggling. You're still going to see sellers giving out incentives. But in a balanced market, you have to wait for the market to get there first, and then wait about 3 to 6 months after that to get to the bottom of price. So that means if we get into a balanced market in, say, November, that's going to be December, January, February, you might hit the bottom of price, but then you got to wait a couple of months, don't you, Greg? Because how do you know? You have to have another month to compare it to. So by the time it emerges that that's the bottom of price, you could easily be well into the first quarter of next year, possibly even the second quarter of next year. But the problem is this: buyers like to buy at the bottom of price, but that's not always the best time to buy, because you cannot get the bottom of price and a buyer's market at the same time. You get one or the other. By the time you have the bottom of price, you'll find that you're actually in a seller's market. And so if you are a buyer that requires, you have to sell your home, so your contingent sale, you need to be in a buyer's market for the sellers to accept your contingency. If you are doing down payment assistance, you want to be in a buyer's market so you're not competing with other buyers that have stronger qualifications. Okay. And also, if you have that perfect home in a balanced market, you're probably going to have competing buyers where you will not have them right now. So this buyer's market is the best time if you want to take advantage of those concessions. Once you get into a balanced market, concessions are the first ones to go. And so that's why this is so important, because it's more important to buy at this time than it is to get at the bottom of price. Okay. You might get a better price later down the road, but you may not get your concession that you would get today. So here's another way to look at it. This is your Cromford Market Index in the black line. Your blue bar is your annual appreciation rate. So note that the black line always moves first. The blue bar moves second. It's a leading indicator. So in the past, when we've hit a bottom of a buyer's market, see here in 2006, kind of into 2007, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 months later, you see that bottom of price to 5% year over year decline. We're going to ignore 2008 because that was an exception, not a rule. We're going to pop over to 2010, the bottom of a buyer's market. Count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right around 5 to 6 months right in here. We hit 11. Note where the Cromford Market Index is right there, already in balance. The bottom of the market right here, which was right around the summer of 2011, note where the Cromford Market Index is, a seller's market. So if you're buying at the bottom of price, most likely you might find yourself in a seller's market or a less, a balanced market, which is not as strong from a buyer's perspective in terms of your negotiations. Also, in 2022, let's go a little more recent. We had a 2-week buyer market here. 1, 2, 3, 4 months later, we saw that 8% year over year decline. Again, by the time you got to that 8-year year over year, you're in a seller's market. Okay. So here we are turning back up, and we're in August. So if we count out about 5 to 6 months, you're looking at September, October, November, December, January, and then give it a couple of months to make sure that's the bottom. You're going to look at February, March, possibly before that bottom actually emerges if we stay at this trajectory. So that's one of the interesting things when you're in a shifting market. Price and negotiations, those are different. Your experience on the ground is going to be a lot different. So as far as West Valley cities and what cities are bouncing, we've stated this before. When you are in a growth state, like Maricopa and Buckeye and Queen Creek, these areas that are still in population stages of growth, they don't have all of their infrastructure, their employment, all that done. They are the first to go into buyers markets, and they're the last to come out. Your interior cities, the Chandlers, the Scottsdales, Avondales, Glendales, they are the last to go into a buyer's market. They are the first to come out. So we're already seeing this now with mortgage rates having come down, that out of the blue, Fountain Hills has now bounced right out of a balanced market into the top 3. Okay, seller markets already. Cave Creek has clawed their way out of a buyer's market. Not just a couple of months ago, Cave Creek was a full-blown buyer's market. Now they are, almost in the top 5 for seller markets. Now Scottsdale has bounced out. So what we're seeing is the Northeast Valley. I know we were talking about West Valley. I'll get there. The Northeast Valley is bouncing first out of that. You do have Avondale in the West Valley that has bounced out of this balanced market back into a seller's market as well. So looking at our West Valley cities in this list, you'll notice that Avondale and Glendale are in the best positions in terms of, are they seller markets or close to seller markets? Peoria also improving on its way back into balance. So Peoria may be on its way back up. The ones that are closer to the interior cities are going to bounce out a little bit better. You've got Goodyear is going flat. Surprise is kind of improved a little bit, but these are definitely the areas, and we've discussed it, where if you have a high percentage of brand new homes in your supply line, it's very difficult for you to pop out of a buyer's market as fast because you just have a little more inventory that's competing. So when we look at areas like Buckeye and Surprise, you're looking at 32% of your overall inventory as new homes. And so it does make it more difficult for the new home builders, but that's just what happens when you're in a growth state. Again, you're the last to come out of it. You'll notice that a lot of your West Valley cities are in that buyer's market realm because it is still growing out there. And if you want to see it on a more individual level, you can see Avondale and Glendale kind of improving, but you also see Peoria improving here. Goodyear's gone flat. Surprise is starting to improve a little bit, but really you're looking at a lot of those cities still in your buyer's market, still good for buyers in terms of negotiations and what they're getting in concessions and so on. So coming into price, we're looking at this appreciation rate for the valley so far. The median is, I like to call it the buyer's budgets. So the buyer's budgets went up a few $1,000s, went down a few $1,000s, just down 0.8%. That's really quite flat, not a big deal. what they get for their budget came down a little bit more, which means that if your median's not moving a whole lot, but your dollar per square foot is, that means that what you're getting for your money is maybe a little bit bigger, right? So when we look at just the West Valley, and note that we're only 16 days into August, so we don't have a full month of August, but we're still over half of the month gone. So that gives us a pretty good idea of how we're going to end it. But if we come into the West Valley zip codes, you can see how flat that line is. It's been very, very stable on price, only down 1.2% from 415 to 410. It's so the buyer's budgets came down about $5,000, not a whole lot. What they get for their budget only came down 0.7. So this is where the big difference between the West Valley and the rest of the valley is, in that the concessions are really keeping your prices from having a massive drop off, because they're paying pretty close to asking price on a lot of these single family homes, but then they're asking for the rate buy downs, they're asking for repairs, sometimes they're even asking for upgrades. So windows, all that stuff. So we're seeing now, though, possibly between now and the end of the year, you're probably going to start seeing that negative year over year start to hit, because note, from August to September of last year, October, November, and then December, we start to see this go up. If this doesn't go up with it, then we're going to start seeing that year over year decline start to emerge. When we see it overall by price range, note that the West Valley has more inventory in the lower price ranges. A lot of these drops are being driven by condos as well. So the condo market is struggling, but if I were to look at just single family in that 3 to 4 range, that is definitely a price point that's very popular and abundant, I should say, in more so in the West Valley and parts of Pinal County, such as Apache Junction. You're going to get more of those. Santan Valley. A lot of the new home builders have been driving towards that first-time home buyer, trying to get more affordable housing in there. But note, you can see that almost every price range is seeing some form of decline, though. So while we're down 2.6%, it's really being driven by this lower range that is driven by mortgage rates. So just to give you a visual of the heat. And I also wanted to just point out that 2011 was the bottom of price, and look at what kind of a market that was. When you're at the bottom of price, like we were back then, you could get a home for $1. But note that you had nearly 19,000 people under contract and 19,000 active, almost rounded up. And that is a frenzy. It was a frenzy of activity. You found yourself getting a great deal, but you were competing with cash offers. You were driving the prices up. So from this point, prices were driven up all the way until about 2013, 2014. But you can see here that we're more in line with 2014 in terms of our active counts at 21,000. We were 22,000 in August of 2014. We would be more balanced if we had an extra 2,000 in escrow, which it looks like hopefully we might be on our way getting there. So here's your map. It's chilly, I'm not going to lie. It's a really cold map. Even for the summer, typically we don't see this kind of chilliness until the fourth quarter, but it has been like this all year long. And if I take out the cold and just highlight the few little coals of our fire here, Gilbert's doing all right. This 85310 in Glendale has been popping up quite a bit. 39 active, 25 under contract. That is right by TSMC. I think that we've got some interesting developments going on in there. Of course, you've got Gila Bend, don't forget them, with 1 active and 2 under contract going in there. So hot, insane. But this is what happens when you change this map and you ask them for just those single family homes under 400,000, that first time home buyer range. The West Valley lights up like a Christmas tree, especially parts of Surprise. You're selling quite a bit of those. Also Waddell in here. You can see along that 101, you're seeing a good amount of that type of inventory going. You can also see, if you're in the Southeast Valley, some of these are onesie twosies where if it goes up, it's gone. But you have more of that inventory in Apache Junction and parts of Santan Valley and Queen Creek going on as well. So the buyers are out there. Those first-time home buyers are taking advantage of a lot of these incentives that the builders are offering. And a lot of those incentives could include even permanent rate buy downs, not just temporary, but permanent. And that is helping them get into a home. So coming in, The buyers right now are still drunk with power. Don't get me wrong. They have no idea that the market has shifted, but their days may be numbered. Um, so let's bring on the concessions. So concessions are hitting a 57% across the valley. Median cost to a seller is $10,000. And that is not counting compensation to agents. It's not counting repairs. That is just going towards lending costs and closing costs. So that has been the same for about a year, but note that this goes up and it can come down very quickly. If we start to see this heading towards balance, this could be the last ditch effort for your buyers to get those concessions. If we come into the West Valley cities, you can see Youngtown, Levine, Avondale. Avondale is a seller's market, don't forget, but they are giving out 85% of their sales have some form of concession involved. Most of your West Valley cities are in the 70 percentile. So even though the valley's at 57%, you have a very high probability of getting a concession in any of these top five West Valley cities. All right. Also, you have a very high percentage of getting a or chance of getting a concession if you are between 350 and 400,000. That's the highest percentage at 72% of all those sales, and you've got a median of 10,800 in that particular price point. But you can see here all the way from 225 all the way up to 600,000. You've got concessions are flying, and this is just for your West Valley zip codes. All right. There you go. That is your West Valley update. And this is for the entire valley, just to remind you that everything is pretty much looking good for buyers. Prices are drifting down or flat, depending on which measure you're looking at. But you're looking at the sales over asking price are very low. And a lot of those going over asking are only like 4 or 5,000. And then they're getting concessions on top of it. So it's really not what you would think it is. Dollar amount concessions are staying high. The negotiations are doing quite well. And of course, days on market are up almost 2 weeks for sellers, and that makes them very negotiable. But the one thing that is good for sellers is the demand has started to rise and the market has started to turn. We are now up so far for August, up about 20 closings a day on average. That's a 9.5% increase over last August. So good news all around for us. I'm super excited to be giving some good news for a change. So,
Yeah.
I just want to thank you, Greg, for bringing us on, and I will turn it back over to you.
Sure. Well, stay on for a minute. Do
Oh,
want to
okay.
ask you about new homes and the percentage of listings that are 2025 builds, as you see it in the West Valley, especially.
Yes, and so I would say in the West Valley, well, overall in the valley, the new home inventory that's active on the MLS. Okay, so not all of them put all of their lots on the MLS. Okay, sometimes they might just do a spec home, but from what we're showing, MLS only has about 13% of their overall inventory as new homes with a year built of 2025 or later, right? West Valley is about 20%. And like I said before, when we get into your Buckeyes and your Surprise, that's 32% of inventory. That's probably the highest right there. Everybody else, the Goodyears, the Tollisons, the Avondales, they're running about 20%, like the West Valley, average, the Peorias as well. And if you get into the East Valley, the only one that really rivals Buckeye and Surprise for new homes would be Santan Valley at 30%.
Yeah. Well, very good. Well, Tina, thanks again for the update. Look forward to seeing you again soon. And again, if you don't subscribe to the Cromford Report, you should. So look them up. Really great information there. And Tina, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Take care of yourself. So anyway, very good to have Tina again and understanding the resale market. Just a quick update on Land Advisors. We're continuing to grow 31 markets now across the country. Very strong annual transaction volume. Very excited to serve the master plan community industry, the home builders, new home builders, especially publics, very active. The multifamily and doing a lot of site selection work. In addition, agriculture, healthcare, and land conservation are all areas we're involved in. Land Advisors Capital doing tremendously well. We're housed out of Austin right now, doing hundreds of millions of dollars of lot banking, land banking, equity and debt. So a tremendous amount of activity, especially Texas, Florida, the Southeast, and just a really, really strong business launch. Carter Froelich, we're partners with. I think many of you have seen his podcasts. If you hadn't, you should check those out. At the same time, doing all the advisory work related to district financing. And here in Arizona, we have community facility districts, and Carter does lots of other work, so look him up too. Our master plan community experience of the West Valley, you could see some of the major projects that we're working on very actively in Estrella, Saddleback, a new community that's coming into its own with multiple builders getting lots prepared. Verado, we continue to represent the Caterpillar Foundation, who own the underlying land, and several of the other major projects in the West Valley. So population growth is what it's all about. That's why we have this great, market here. Is one, we have land, room to grow, and at the same time, where we can grow is shifting. So as we look to decade by decade, you can see the history of growth. It's dialed back a bit in 2010 to 2020, and we'll see if we hit this population projected of 85,000 annually. I think it's going to be closer to 80,000 for 2020 to 2030. And then you could see it dialing back again down a little bit for 30 to 40 as projections go. But most importantly is looking at the share that the West Valley is going to obtain by our projections as to where growth will occur, and more than half the growth will be in the West Valley. Our population in Phoenix Metro now, we've broken through the 5 million mark, and we'll be improving by 80,000 or so a year. Watching that growth occur, and you could begin to see on the left, the chart is showing the overall value in terms of population at the time and the area of the footprint of development. But you could take it here in 15-year increments and begin to see the West Valley growth that really came on quite strong in the 80s to 2000, and much of that was Northwest. As we move forward to the next 15 years, you could really see the West Valley coming on, the impacts of I-10 completion, the 303, the 101, and some of that improved transportation. And then you could see what's happened since then to this point today. And so that is all the building that has occurred. And you could see us hitting boundaries that include the Gila River Indian community, large regional parks, and the state land that is really guiding growth for the future. And we could see those future paths of growth and where they can occur. And we'll begin to focus on some of those areas throughout this presentation. And that violet color is large-scale master plan communities that have been planned for many years and some replanned time and again. On the downside, our employment growth is off like the rest of the country. So we've seen that dial back significantly. We would hope to see that improve in the year or two ahead as we bounce out of what is this mini slowdown. As we look to the kinds of employment we're seeing, you could see these logos and just the massive expansion that we have seen of not just jobs in the West Valley, but high quality, especially high-end manufacturing. So very exciting to see this kind of employment, and especially the kind of investment. We'll see an aerial and photo of TSMC, but that started out as a $14 billion project. Then it was 40 some billion, then it was 65 billion. And then the most recent amazing announcement occurred late last year, which was another 100 billion being spent. Amcor landing in Peoria, very exciting. Microsoft with all of their data centers and that activity. So all driving housing permits. And now you can see the darker blue versus the light blue. That is single family at the bottom of the stack, and that is multifamily at the top end of the stack. And this is the valley as a whole. So you can see over the last 12 months, we have still issued nearly 40,000 building permits in total. We're beginning to see some great shifts in that. We'll talk about some of those shifts that is occurring. Again, as we look to the rise of the West Valley, we look at limited supply in the East Valley, driving growth, of course, to Pinal County, which we'll continue to see grow. We'll continue to see the East Valley shrink. But you could see the comparison between 2010 and 15 years later, the rise of the West Valley. Again, the waves is primarily related to especially the rate shock that occurred that slowed building permits because builders got stuck with lots of inventory on canceled sales when rates rose. So as we look to, again, the West Valley of overall permits, again, West Valley overall market share at 53%. And then you could see the West Valley in the dark blue and where the builders are lining up and where those permits are being pulled. So again, pretty exciting for the West Valley. When we look at the distribution of stores that are open and selling, and we probably got some additions to this map coming very soon as Teravalis opens west of the White Tanks. That'll be exciting to see, and we'll talk about some other projects that are going to be lifting off. But you see real clusters here of development that are occurring. The finaling out of Peoria. When we look to Surprise, we see a big cluster around Asante in the 60 and the 303, around Vistancia and North Point, and soon to be Saddleback. And then along the 303, much of this land is disappearing quickly. We look around Verrado and outside the gates of Verrado, Central Buckeye, along where there is sewer and water, where the void of sewer and water exists between Goodyear and Buckeye, hopefully soon to be solved. The last of the land in Goodyear north of the Gila River. And then we look down to Estrella here, which is now blossoming with lots of new home builders arriving, and the last of the Southwest Valley and Levine and the 101. Again, very little to replace. So as we look at just a year's absorption, these green are the subdivisions. 100 subdivisions need to be replaced, let alone new growth that is occurring. So lots of work to do, and it's very hard to find land with sewer, water, roads, and ability to get to the next piece without breaking through into some new infrastructure. And we'll talk about that in a moment. The other great thing about the West Valley is this now capture of sales over 800,000. So you could see the distribution in the yellow is the new home closings. And when we look to resale, you could see it's pretty well distributed, but you can get to see the areas of the infill area of Peoria, but especially around Vistancia, soon to be Saddleback in this area, and especially around Verrado and west of the 303, and including Estrella to a great degree. So as we look to the future, we really need to look at the applications for planning and zoning, and you could be beginning to see some transition here. And that includes moving west out the Sun Valley Parkway into West Surprise, more in and around Surprise, just north of the 60 and the 303. And we'll begin to see that growth migrate further in north and west along the 60. Then again, back to Central Buckeye and the other areas, you'll begin to see a thinning out of dots in the Southwest Valley where there is no more land to be had for single family. And that includes Levine, and we'll begin to see that slowdown occur and the migration of dots further west. I think the other thing to look at is finished lots on the ground. A balanced supply, so everybody knows, should be between 18 and 22 months. So here we are at a balanced supply, and that is with fewer permits being pulled in this recent slowdown. So the denominator effect is expanding. What was a supply in the lower teens and the higher teens has now expanded a little bit. We'll expect to see that supply contract again in terms of months of supply. When we look to the West Valley and the absorption, the amazing absorption of apartments, when we see absorption here over the last 12 months exceeding record deliveries, that's really the amazing message. And when we look to that absorption exceeding deliveries, it will begin to sop up some of this excess that's occurred through the deliveries in the West Valley. When we look to occupancy, the most interesting thing is that we've actually seen occupancy rise slightly, but again, through a lot of concessions. Tina was mentioning on the resale market, concessions being offered. Well, especially we know to fill all these multifamily units is taking a couple months of free rent and maybe some other givings related to keeping that absorption going very strong. And we've seen rents fall slightly over the period of time. The other interesting thing overall on single family rental rates, they've just really remained quite flat for the past few years. I don't have a direct explanation for why that is, but rents on single family had not done this huge rise. And what's happened here, most interestingly, is we've had rental rates increase by 54% over 8 years and a rocketing of household income. So now finally income is kept up with rents remaining flat and that increase of income. The other is the build to rent market was all the rage, Phoenix being right at the top of the charts there. You could see the other main markets. And we think about build to rent, we're talking about the horizontal apartments, the townhomes for rent, rather than really the multifamily side of just traditional garden apartments. So land transactions, of course, very representative of future growth. A good depiction of 21, 22 being record years in the very large transactions that had closed in the gold color here, which included the Estrella closing we had, Sun Valley that was bought out of bankruptcy after many years, and then Teravalis, the 37,000 acres that closed. But not just that, BNSF, Proving Ground, Saddleback, and North Point, all very large West Valley transactions. And then we could look to what was King Ranch, now called Rio 1900, the remains of Goodyear here being bought that is all under development right now, and a multitude of other fairly large transactions that have occurred just over the past 2 years. And maybe most notably is Mac up here on the state land wrapping around TSMC. But lots of other closings. We'll get to some details on that. You could see the transaction volume overall for Phoenix, but you could also see the West Valley surge in 21, the dip during rate rise, and now increasing again, but 53% of all land transactions in the West Valley. This is the most amazing slide, I think, related to a shift in a character of land sales in dollar volume. And you could see residential in the West Valley was 47%. But because of the high dollar for data center land and industrial combined, we're looking at 43% of the land in the West Valley in dollars was industrial data center, which we've never seen the likes of ever before, commercial coming back a bit. So you could begin to see that mix changing pretty dramatically. These are the large scale master plan communities throughout the valley. I think you can now see the vast majority are in the West Valley, build out of Eastmark. Desert Ridge will move up into more state land consumption later on. Now we have Blossom Rock and Radiance in the far East Valley next to Eastmark, Bella Vista, Merle, Sun City Anthem kind of round out most of what's in the East Valley. But then we look to the West Valley. You could just see the host of communities. The price points range pretty greatly. When we think about Toll Brothers at Sterling Grove on 800 acres that we represented the seller on, magnificent project, but look at the range, 480 to $1.2 million, Verado up to over $2 million. When we look at Vistancia, again, more less than any custom, but 5 to 850,000. So we're seeing a much broader distribution of price range, including Estrella. So that's pretty exciting to see more segments open in the West Valley. These are the active adult communities that are selling. Cantamia down to its last couple of years, Pebble Creek down to its last year. Victory at Verado's performing quite well. Sun City Festival has a ways to go, breaking into their new phases, and Heritage at Asante facing build out. So when we look to each of these projects, we're beginning to see sunset on many of the active adult projects, making way for new ones to occur. The west of the White Tanks, again, quite an amazing story from the history of it to the early rise that included Tartesso and Sun City Festival, and now the grand opening for Florio at Teravalis with the 7 builders that have landed out here and other builders to follow. Very exciting beginnings west of the White Tanks. The other big thing that has held things up, we'll talk about water in a moment, but it really put a freeze frame on this area for a period of time while we were going through the adjustments with the Department of Water Resources. We'll talk about more in a bit. We recently closed on Haciampa Ranch. So many other things to happen west of the White Tanks, where eventually we will see 100,000 acres turn into a few 100,000 homes that eventually this area will house 1 million people over the next 50 years. More transportation required, and we'll see some of that coming up. So on the industrial and commercial side are under construction. If you remember last year, we were coming down and off of a 40-some million square feet under construction. This will continue to decline. Vacancy rates are up a bit, but absorption is still pretty strong. Retail's the darling child with vacancy rates down, and office is still the problem child, but coming out of it a bit. And we've actually saw 1 quarter of positive absorption. That's the valley as a whole. The amazing story of the 303 corridor related to industrial. You could see the 2019, and here we go just 6 years later, and just look at the comparison related to the amount that was constructed out here. And every major household brand, major manufacturing, data centers, lots of exciting things, probably one of the most active industrial development areas in the United States. And this is what has resulted, all of these major companies landing, and very exciting at that. We've talked about TSMC for a moment, and now Mac Real Estate Group is working on the development plans for the land wrapping around TSMC. We'll handle some of the suppliers, thousands of residential units. Quite exciting up here. I won't go through all the other major household names and brands, but Amcor Technology, the site may move around a little bit within Peoria, but they are landing here in Peoria. We're still waiting on BNSF, and hopefully their zoning being approved here in November for their major intermodal facility that is up in that area. So in Buckeye and South Goodyear, you can begin to see, again, just household names, major corporations, and major facilities that are landing. I will later compare what we see here along Highway 85, I believe, in the next 5 years, just by looking at this map, resembling the activity that occurred along the 303 freeway. So, and then we have the Union Pacific Railroad here, and then major development activity around Verrado Way and Interstate 10, which you can see here. Vestar moving very quickly related to their major power center. Sunbelt, Sci-Hi here with their Costco and expansion of the retail here. Josh Simon and his project. So many new things, including hospital, healthcare, build to rent. This whole area has really exploded. If you hadn't been out there, it is definitely worth seeing. And then lots of future state land to be planned in that corridor. We're doing quite a bit of work with Carefree Partners, with Rick West and Scott Phillips and Rico. Very excited about Surprise City Center related to the future of a real urban environment here. Mixed use, lots of employment, a very well executed project. And again, Elm Street is in this area here. Again, Josh Simon is doing some really great retail in that regard. Prasada, another amazing story along the 303. Probably one of the most intense areas for retail development over the past several years. I mentioned Josh Simon again as it relates to what he has done on the east side of the 303. Just a massively expanding area, but not just that, it's the character of the restaurants, the auto mall that has experienced record sales, Costco record sales for any opening of a Costco. So very exciting things happening along the 303. We're honored to be involved in Metro Center here. When we look at what has occurred, Concord Wilshire, the developer, you could see the complete clearing of the mall besides Walmart and the Sears building, but really all of this land has been mitigated now, and we have builders identified and very excited about the retail to follow and see a resurgence. Again, just a major development here off the 101 with Vi and the Mattel Adventure Park. Hopefully here opening before the end of the year, but massive construction scale. The TSMC project, you could see current aerials, just unbelievable, along with the Halo Vista project that is wrapped around it, and the employment. And it's not, again, just jobs, but it's the quality of these jobs that are arriving. Amcor as packaging for Apple, very exciting again for that $2 billion facility mentioned earlier. From a transportation side, thank you all who voted for Prop 479. You could see the massive amount of improvements that will occur through that half-cent sales tax and $15 billion being spent over the 20-year tax period. So very exciting to see new interchanges, surface road improvements, transit and other items that will keep us moving here in Phoenix. Here's a depiction of the West Valley. You can see the SR30 here, which will commence construction near immediately here, the completion of the 303 south of 10 to intersect with Highway 85. I-11 on the long-term plans, not part of the half-cent sales tax, but long-term planning's being done. And you can see the framework that has occurred over the decades of planning to make sure we'll keep the valley moving. Lots of other improvements to occur. West Valley's blessed with incredible amounts of open space related to Lake Pleasant, White Tank, Skyline, Buckeye Hills, Astray Mountain, South Mountain, all regional parks within a 10-minute drive for most anyone residing in the West Valley, along with all the major sports and venues that everybody's quite aware of. But the regional parks and their size, over 100,000 acres of parks. Water, I've been very passionate about, spoke to many of you over the years related to some of the throes with water. And I think that as we look to the issues, we're still struggling with this issue, with this idea of unmet demand. It's in litigation right now. There has been 2 lawsuits filed, one, the Home Builders Association and the Goldwater Institute, another by our both House and Senate, related to both ADAWs and unmet demand. On a very positive note, Harquahala Valley has been approved for augmentation meaning the movement of water. The year prior, it did open the area to allow private utilities to participate in the movement of water. And it's not just Harquahala Valley. We sold another major farm, which is, I would call it a water farm, that is in that same region. There is the McMullen Valley, there is Butler Valley, there's Harquahala Valley, and we will begin to see that water wheel into the valley to help increase our supplies. The Buckeye Irrigation District, again, had a law passed that freed up about 5,000 acre feet for future development of surface water. So that is passed, not implemented. Ag to Urban, Craig Crumweedy, Mike Cowley spent a tremendous amount of time on this. The year prior, it was vetoed. It did pass this year. It's not terribly complicated, but if you want to know more about it, we're happy to assist in looking at Ag to Urban, whether it benefits you and how. But that is the decline of agriculture related to retiring certificate and allowing to get approval for development. The other item that was talked about for a couple of years, but finally has been put into action is ADAWS. That's the alternative designation of assured water supply. Again, there is some litigation over the fairness of it. We'll see where that ends up. But Buckeye and EPCOR have been the first 2 to enter into an ADAWS application, and the ability to free up where there was a moratorium. I just still point out that within Phoenix and Pinal County AMAs, the state land is irrigating upon 37,000 acres of land that could result in enough water for well over 100,000 houses as that begins to retreat. Colorado River allocations are going to be all the news in 2026. I think preparing for that augmentation of water and wheeling through the CAP or through pipes will become more important and focused upon related to these inevitable arguments and some cutbacks regarding Colorado River water. But we're quite secure otherwise. I just love this map. That blue is what I call an ocean of water, where water is found at less than 150-foot water depth. And you could even see the 300 to 500-foot depth is a reasonable level to access groundwater, and there is tons and tons of it. And we could surely use the rights to a judicial use of it over time while we begin to conserve water and especially import water. I'll quickly wrap up here. Some of the same conclusions as last year, that the West Valley will continue to dominate the region. Its population growth, new single and multifamily housing of all types. Industrial, we pointed to as a major consumer of land. but again, into high-end manufacturing and this explosive high-quality retail development that we pointed to. And the quality and the scale of the employment and its centers are attracting national, but also international. It's become global news. What we're creating here is we might also coin it, and has been coined, the Silicon Desert. And I expect more and more investment to occur. Talked about transportation. Again, we've got the tax pass. That's great, but it's not going to be enough. We're going to have to be mindful of expanding our transportation corridors. Power is under pressure, especially related to data center usage. APS SRP assures all we have all the power we need for our normal course of development while they shore up the additional needs for data centers and, of course, the power behind AI. Water and wastewater infrastructure will be the focus of this next decade. We talked about water. Wastewater is the other factor. Numerous wastewater plants needing to be expanded or even created, and that doesn't come at a small cost. Again, the majority of the growth, as we saw west of the White Tanks or the Northwest Valley, when we look at Saddleback and Estancia, Asante, Sunhaven soon to come, most of the growth in the West Valley will be in these large-scale, well-planned, high-quality master plan communities. And this is different than the growth that had marched through most of the Southeast Valley. Most of Close and Phoenix was built on 40 and 80-acre parcels till we got out to the edge. So I want to thank everybody. I want to thank Tina for her opening remarks on the resale market. It's very important to watch. Really appreciate everybody who's attended and listened in. And Tina, again, many thanks to you.
My pleasure.
Okay, everybody, enjoy the rest of the day.